Hello, and welcome to an episode of Through the Pages that I have been looking forward to since the moment I started this book. Drug Use for Grown-Ups by Dr. Carl Hart. This is the second book from Dr. Carl Hart. I read his first one, High Price. This is him here. He's been doing a ton of press lately, like podcasts and all that type of stuff with the book. This just came out a couple days ago, or I should say that this year. And right away I was thinking, like, is it too soon to think this is in my top 10 of the year already? Like, this book is not like any other book related to drugs that I've reviewed on here. So going back to when I was doing the like month-long or episodes that would recap all the books read in a month, there was several books related to drugs sprinkled in there. Nothing that held a candle to this in terms of importance for society and sort of like relation to policy, like true, like this current state of drugs in our society, not just going deep on psychedelics or something like that. This was challenging for me, and I'm very, very forward thinking when it comes to drug laws, I will say. But this sort of dispelled some of the myths related to what we'll call hard drugs. I don't want to give away too much of the book, but I think it's important to set like a certain precedence for it so you're not like blindsided if you do check it out. Because when I say it was challenging for me, that he speaks to things that innately in us we just want to reject. He comes out as a drug user in this book, which I think is important to do. I remember when Peter Kobach started doing his push for cannabis legalization in Peoria through his city council campaign years ago. That was my kind of crossroads. It was like, man, I never really speak about cannabis. Super passionate about it. Believe it's a basic human right, and that no adult or any official has a right to say, like, that part of nature, nah, you're not allowed to use it. And so I kind of came out of the closet a little bit on that one and recognized that I have further work to do on that. Day job situation, the usual hang-ups. But he comes out as not only a recreational drug user, and leaving that open to assume cannabis may be a couple of little things, said, I've been using heroin for 5 years. And that really took me back the moment I read it, thinking, oh no, this is not what we need. This is regression. We don't need to be fighting for these. And it's not to say that prior to this book I was opposed to decriminalizing all drugs. I do believe all drugs should be legal. I just think we learned from alcohol, and it's the same conversations again with every other substance. And so in time I think we'll get there. It's just we just have to fight for our own rights to get to that point. And I was nervous that this was sort of an overstep or glamorizing drug use that is generally perceived as more horrific. But what he discusses very, very articulately in this is that we lately, especially in psychedelics, have been championing certain substances off of the disgrace of others. So to be able to validate ketamine therapy while saying, yes, but PCP that's a street drug, that's a dirty one, we are opposed to that, even though ketamine was derived from PCP. It's just sort of a societal thing, and that if you can make one kind of look good, then okay, we can get behind it, but there has to be a bad. It's kind of like the white privilege only exists because that there is discrepancies in other races. So you can't have one without the other. It's like we can't get one drug pushed forward without admitting, okay, but those are bad. There always has to be some villain in it. And it's generally not the substance. And that's something that he goes into, which other books related to drugs have gone into, that I really appreciate. And I try to, in my relation to coming out of the closet as a drug user type of thing, in conversation, when I hear someone say something that's just maybe flat out ignorant, or a way that something is phrased commonly that's really hindering to the narrative, I try to check it, and he did a pretty good job on that. He did an incredible job on this whole book. I'm underselling it at this point. I'm just kind of, this is a topic that's very near and dear to me, I'll say. he stood up for the substances in the way that they needed to be stood up for. The first thought on heroin per se will be the deaths, the overdoses. Aren't we in an opioid epidemic? But if we look at those deaths or those overdoses, subtract the ones where the substance was mixed with something else. Subtract the ones where they didn't know what dosage they were getting. Subtract the ones where alcohol was used as well. Subtract those experiencing extreme poverty. You get down to it, and it's not the substance that's the root of all evil. And that was a point that he really hit well because of being a neuroscientist, not just an advocate. That he's able to say, I've been doing this for 20 years, administering doses to people, to regular users, to addicts, and weighing these things back and forth. And when you have the substance, when he says he's using heroin, he's not shooting up junk off the street. It's a neat little white powder snorted. It's very different. And it's like we can't have these conversations without them escalating. And he did a very good job of rolling this out in a de-escalated way, that when you remove that contention, we can really get to the crux of these issues. And I think, as difficult as it may be for some to wrap their head around it, one of the main drives of drug policy, I won't say of the drug war, but of our treatment of drugs should be safety of the user. It's undeniable that people are going to be using drugs, so safety of the user has to be a goal or something we're focused on. And by acknowledging that the rhetoric surrounding these substances often is rolls together everything that could possibly be bad about the substance or things that go along with it, rather than just discussing the substance itself. He goes on a hike in one section of the book with a woman who works for a college in Geneva, and she says heroin is one of the safest drugs in the world. And that is such a challenge to our notion, and some of that's pop culture of heroin. You think of an addict. You think of Requiem for a Dream and Jared Leto's arm all black. It's very easy to go to those things, and very easy as a drug user to say, I'm doing these drugs, not that one. I'm on the good side of this. I'm riding the good wave. I'm hitting the smart ones. But it really is oppressive in a class sense. Drug laws, just like the quote he has in the beginning of the book from James Baldwin, really are only used against poor people. And a lot of times that goes to race as well, but I'm not going to say that it's just black people or just Latino, because it's a class thing. Though in the drug war, there are a lot of specifically harmful laws for black people, like the disparity between crack and cocaine. So in this book, he sort of touched on the substances individually, which I think is a good way of going about it, because they have such nuances to them. He dug into things like the myth of meth mouth and how similar it is to Adderall. I remember once mentioning that it was very similar to Adderall, this being crystal meth, and a friend quickly refuting it, saying, well, yeah, but, we breathe oxygen, which is O2. O3 is terrible. That'd kill us. So one little tweak, and it's something completely different. And that's true. But as solid of a deflection as that is, these are very similar in their effect, and it's not to be disregarded. And so he as a neuroscientist, once again, clarifies these in a very clear way, and clarifies in a clear way. Great sentence. But this book really kind of hit on some of the discussions that are harder to have, because whether it's one person who gets it, one doesn't, and you're trying to just get that conversation to even get rolling, or it's someone like who thinks they have the understanding, but they're not all the way there, and still to hear like heroin and cocaine recreational use is like, no, you draw the line somewhere. Like, think it through. Like, that's the snap reaction to have, but it doesn't quite make sense. I'm not saying that everyone is going to become like recreational heroin users, that it should be the next cannabis. I'm saying the people that do use it, most of them aren't addicts. Most of them handle it just fine. And if most of them had better access to cleaner substances, access to clean needles, if they were using it intravenously, we would only see benefit. And I do believe drugs and drug policy, much like Terence McKenna said, become the clothes of our society. They color it. You know, if you go to Dublin, you don't have to get drunk. But if you'd like to, anywhere you're ready to go. That place, it's just begging you to. In America, we have alcohol. Vaping, I would say, is probably the next biggest one, and refined sugar and meat and the substances that really drive our minds, and prescription pills are, it all adds up. You look at kind of where we are as a society, and it's a very oppressive place. It's a very segregated place. It's not a very forward-thinking place. And as we allow more human rights to be given, not that we should have to be fighting for them so hard, I think we'll all be able to be a little bit more in the lifestyles we'd like to be, you know, through this book, whether he's, you know, has occasional cocaine use. In other countries, we're super pure. Again, it's not half filled with levamisole or any other garbage like you would get here. I see friends doing coke in Peoria, and I'm like, you realize how far away that came from? Like, how many steps in between, and how such a small amount of coke is in there relative to the other shit. But in the right settings, he is doing these things, and he's not apologetic about it. And it's not that he does it and it becomes detrimental. He really articulates it well, and I think it's substances that we have trouble talking about. And it was honestly just nice to hear clear discussion, not rhetoric, not the exhausted old thing. It's just clear-cut science from the frontier of the subject. And it's so hard to find. Today I just saw a tweet from I think she's a senator from Virginia, I believe. And she was saying, I will never legalize cannabis. It will simply lead to more cannabis overdose and more cannabis deaths. And this is someone writing policy that doesn't understand you cannot have an overdose or a death from cannabis. No one can consume that much. Like, you won't. You can have a bad reaction to an edible. That's a different thing. But that people so sadly high up have such little understanding is why I think this book is so important. Because he, much like I discussed Dr. Colin Campbell in Future of Nutrition, I think he also wrote this for people in the industry, for people who need to let go of some of their biases. And he talked about working within some organizations where people would, you know, pull him aside at a party or something and say, like, I really like the work you're doing. I can't publicly say that, but keep doing what you're doing. And it's just a very hypocritical society, you know. He speaks something that I feel all the time of, you know, not so much COVID times, but going to dinners or to social functions where everyone wants to come there and relax a little bit. It's our social time. So everyone comes there and they can have their glass of wine, have a beer. Or you smoke a little weed before and then you go in and have to hide that you were doing anything. And that's where he is, of maybe using a little opiate before going in. And it's this shameful otherness, this context that we have to put ourselves in, because our drug of choice, the drug that we choose for our pursuit of happiness, isn't the mainstream one. And I will always fight for these sorts of human rights. just basic human rights. Right now I'm reading When We Rise by Cleve Jones, and it's just fucking mind-blowing, honestly. Like, I cannot wait to review that book. I'm savoring it, though. I'm trying not to finish it too fast. But, yeah, this is a book that, as much as I'd like to say I would recommend it to a bunch, I'm going to put this in people's hands, I don't ever want to be pushy with subjects that are delicate. And this is one where I will tiptoe lightly on. I wanted to post, like, pictures of paragraphs and sentences and things he was posting a lot more, but I knew that was me in a little bit of that, like, I'm gonna ruffle some feathers. Like, this is gonna check you. Like, and because of how much I care about the subjects discussed in this book, I really am being conscientious of how I'm going about discussing the themes in this book that were there in my heart but hadn't been so amplified or backed by data. And I'm very grateful to have a book like this, as someone who cares deeply about, not about the substances. I don't want it to be misconstrued as that. Like, yes, there are drugs that are fascinating, that are very important to me, that make me the man I am. But this is for basic human rights. It's for mental health. It's for all these addiction centers that treat the results of a failed drug war, not misuse of a certain substance in each case. Because something that he does hit on in this is that, fentanyl, Oxycontin, Vicodin, these all have physical withdrawals. There's a physical addiction to them. Not with heroin. Other countries continue to use heroin. We put prescription pills into our patients, and then they're left with physical addictions. So there's roads we're going down that we're patting ourselves on the back that we no longer use heroin, we don't use medical cocaine, we don't use any of it, we use pharmaceuticals trusted by our pharmaceutical companies. It's not better. And that's a very difficult thing to dismantle, and it has to be done with poise. And so this really helped me. It felt like an addition to my tool belt as someone who wants to work on these issues. And in other books related to drugs, you might see me a little goofy or a little laugh. Like, there was levity in this, but this is really important. And there are people in jail for things that should be legal. And there are people who are still in jail for the 100-to-1 disparity between crack and cocaine. And we have to fight to rectify this, not because I want my drugs to be legal. Like Bob Marley said, I'm not doing this because my drug of choice is, I want it to be legal. It's personal freedom. Like, just because it's like with gay marriage. Like, all right, I'm good to marry now. Like, well, I don't have to fight. It's not my group. Like, you got to keep fighting. That's humanity. That's one of your own. And so I see that just with any other drug user. I've gone through my own addictions. Alcohol was my worst one. I am a few days away from being 5 years free from that addiction. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I've been addicted to a few things in my life, and it's just horrendous that we have a system that leads people directly to it, and then we won't fight for them once they're in it. So I hope you read this book, and I hope you read more of his work, because it's important, and there are people hurting who don't need to be.